What was the Weimar Republic doing from the start?
The Weimar Republic was the government of Germany between 1918 and 1933. Its roots lie in revolution, which began in Germany in autumn 1918, before the end of the First World War. Parts of the army mutinied and soldiers led uprisings. The Allies offered Germany peace under strict conditions, such as become more democratic, but the Kaiser refused. On the 9th of November 1918, the Kaiser abdicated, and a day later, Friedrich Ebert signed an armistice and set up a new provisional republic. The Weimar Constitution was a democratic government led by Ebert, after he became the first president following an election in January 1919. It used proportional representation, so 33% of votes got you 33 seats in Parliament. Power was shared between the Reichstag in Berlin and 18 German states. At one point, the Weimar Republic was the most democratic governmental system in the world. Opposition to the Weimar Republic included communists who wanted a revolution similar to that of Russia, and the Kaiser's men who wanted to return to his old system. Some of Ebert's enemies started a powerful myth that Germany was forced into armistice in 1918, and those who signed it were the November criminals. The Treaty of Versailles was signed by Ebert, reluctantly, on the 28th of June 1919. It meant Germany lost 10% of its land, all its overseas colonies, 12.5% of its population, 16% of its coal and 48% of its iron industry. Its army was also downsized, and they were forced to begin paying severe reparations. The German people were horrified by this. They were angry at Germany's lack of representation in Versailles. It tipped Germany into chaos, as well as compromising Ebert's support. The reparation to be paid was agreed in 1921 and was set at 6,600 million. Although Germany managed to pay the first year's bill, they deferred the next year. This led to French and Belgian troops entering the industrial rural area and taking raw goods and materials as debt repayment. German workers led strikes, but the French grew quickly impatient and killed 100 workers, also expelling 100,000 protesters from the area. Because of the lack of goods to trade, the German government simply started printing more money. This meant banknotes became worthless, and in some cases, it was cheaper to burn money than buy wood for fires. Hyperinflation ended with Stresemann as Chancellor. He called in worthless marks, called off passive resistance, and negotiated the Dawes Plan with America, a series of loans to be repaid at a later date. However, the Weimar government suffered greatly. They lost middle-class support, and right-wing opponents had yet more to blame them for.
To what extent did the Republic recover after 1923? Germany was already in a fragile state after losing the war in 1918, and when the leader of the Weimar Republic of Germany, Friedrich Ebert, agreed to the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June 1919, it tipped Germany into chaos. One of the big threats to the Weimar Republic was the political opposition to Weimar. Many people were living in poverty, and starving people started to turn towards communism. More worryingly for the Republic was that around 30% of the vote regularly went to parties that were opposed to the Republic. However, the Republic received a lot more support from the public when Stresemann became Chancellor in 1923. He was a more able politician than Ebert and had more support because he was right-wing. Stresemann addressed the problem of hyperinflation by calling in all worthless marks and burning them. He then introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark and agreed to receive loans from the USA to get Germany into a better economic state. He also signed the Young Plan, which spread the reparation payments out for another 59 years, meaning he could concentrate on building Germany up again. By this time, most German people supported the Weimar Republic because of the great progress Stresemann was making. He continued to recover Germany by agreeing to the Locarno Treaties, which set Germany's western border. It also helped Germany's admission into the League of Nations. By 1927, German industrial production had returned to the level it was at in 1913 before the war, and a new benefit system and welfare state had been increased by the Republic. Wages for industrial workers rose, and for many Germans there was a higher standard of living. Overall, I believe the Republic recovered massively after 1923, and that would not have been possible if Stresemann had not been appointed Chancellor. He built up people's confidence into the German economy by improving its prosperity and providing jobs, helping the country out of unemployment, and he made Germans proud of their country once more after coming out of the post-war depression. The achievements of the Weimar Republic were that the Dawes Plan was negotiated with America loans, the reparation payments were spread out over a period of time, and the American loans went into both German businesses and public works. The social welfare benefits and fund wages for state employees increased, and it allowed free expressions of ideas. Writers, poets and artists flourished, and during this period the famous Bauhaus style of design was developed. Parties who had cooperated in the revolution of 1918 began to cooperate again, and in 1929 Germany was accepted into the League of Nations.
Able to dominate Germany by 1933.
How did the Nazi Party develop in the 1920s? Policy. As the country was doing quite well in the golden years between 1924 to 29, people weren't voting extremists. As the Nazis were an extremist party, this hindered their progress, so they dropped their old radical policies and instead adopted an adaptable approach, which meant they did not have a clear policy. E.g., this can be shown with their name, the German Workers' Party, which suggests they were left-wing when they were in fact right-wing. Organisation. The Nazis began to make themselves into a proper political party and gained themselves a high profile by 1923. They began a network of local Nazi parties, set up the SS, and enlarged the SA, which often broke up disruption in order to give themselves a good reputation. Propaganda. An example of Goebbels' work is he orchestrated the 1936 Olympics in an attempt to present Germany as an idyllic country. Prior to the Games, Hitler's use of propaganda was definitely a strong reason as to why he could dominate Germany, because right from the start he used rallies to spread the idea of Nazism, thus gaining votes for his party. The reason they were such a success was he used technology and managed to create an electric atmosphere of anticipation. The most noticeable of these rallies were the Nuremberg rallies.
Why did the Nazis have little success before 1930? There are three main reasons to this, which were they were not taken seriously, they had the wrong policies, and they were an extremist party. They were not taken seriously due to the fact that many of their attempts to gain recognition in the early years, such as the Munich Putsch in 1923, were in fact either failed or regarded as a bit of a joke by the politicians. They had wrong policies because they had very radical policies which weren't applicable at the time. For example, Hitler had to drop the policy of taking control of all the businesses because all the businesses were doing well, so therefore why would they want to go into a communist state where they would lose all their money? And they were an extremist party which, at the best time, it's very hard to gain votes. And people weren't going to vote extremists during the golden years. And also the Weimar made this quite hard due to proportional representation, which meant that it was very hard for them to gain enough seats in the Reichstag to be taken seriously. Why was Hitler able to become Chancellor by 1933? This was due, firstly, to Wall Street crash in October 1929, which led to a downward spiral of Germany's economy, which then led to social and economic problems, and people, as a result, began to vote extremist. They either tended to vote communist or Nazi, and the Nazis, by using many tactics employed, gained more votes. By July 1932, they were the largest party in the Reichstag with 230 seats. Following Hindenburg's use of Article 48 to prevent Hitler from becoming Chancellor, they used von Papen. However, he resigned due to lack of support, and they had to rehold elections in November, where they gained 200 seats. But again, Article 48 was used, and von Schleidner was employed. However, he again had to resign due to lack of support. Hindenburg in January 1933 began to have secret meetings. They eventually offered Hitler the role of Chancellor by the 30th of January, believing that they would be able to control him.
How did Hitler become a dictator in 1933? On the 17th of February, police became under Nazi control as they were ordered to cooperate with the SA and SS. On the 27th, 4,000 communists and Nazi opponents were arrested after the Reichstag fire. The day after, Hindenburg issued an emergency decree which allowed police to arrest suspects without trial and allowed Hitler to take over regional governments. This shows the use of fear to reduce freedom. On the 13th of March, Goebbels was appointed the head of new Ministry of Propaganda, which cut freedom of speech as he had control of the media. On the 24th of March, the Enabling Act allowed Hitler to pass decrees freely, which made him a legal dictator, and he got rid of the Reichstag. On the 7th of April, Nazis eliminated opponents from public services, for example, Jewish teachers. On the 2nd of May, all workers were to belong to the new German Labour Front, so trade union opposition was crushed. On the 30th of June, the Night of Long Knives got rid of opposition within the Nazi Party, and the armed forces were pledged allegiance to Hitler. In August, on the death of Hindenburg, Hitler becomes Führer.
Welcome to Nazi Germany. I am Sergei, a communist working underground for the better good. I am trying to get our message out and ultimately stop Hitler.
I sent a series of messages out into the world informing people of everything that was going on, hoping to be heard. Here is Twitler.
In 1933, Hitler took power in Germany. This was bad news for many people. The Day of Lost Books was when the Nazis burned all books written by their opposition and by Jewish writers. The Nuremberg laws were passed in 1933, putting restrictions on Jewish people and other Nazi opponents. Goebbels was Hitler's head of propaganda. He was completely dedicated to Hitler, and most of the success of getting Germany on his side was from Goebbels. Hitler was portrayed as a hero. Hitler also made the editor's law, which meant that he had complete control over all the media. In 1943, Archbishop Garland spoke out against the programme for killing disabled children and babies. He was just one of many prominent figures in Germany who was against Hitler, but he was not enough to do anything. In 1936, Germany hosted the Olympics to show off the strength and greatness of the Aryan race. This was again down to Goebbels, who portrayed Germany as a master race. The Gestapo were the secret state police. They arrested people and sent people to concentration camps. They used terror to keep people in order. Hitler also used censorship to keep people silent and make sure that only his views were heard. The Edelweiss Pirates were a group of people mocking Hitler. They were generally young people, but again they were not enough to create lots of opposition. In 1942, Hitler and the Nazis came up with the final solution. This was the large-scale killing of all the Jews, opposition and other groups. There were not enough underground fighters to keep Hitler at bay. They needed more. And by 1945, the underground fighting had not worked. 6 million Jews were dead, and Hitler had definitely gained effective control.
What was it like to live in Nazi Germany? Well, the things you gotta know. Hitler Youth. Sorry. policies on women and family, Nazi economy, and life before and during the war.
Who benefited from Nazi rule? Farming communities. The Y10 farm law protected farmers and there was a guaranteed market and prices for their goods. Middle classes. They had the threat of communists removed and people had pride after Hitler overturned the Treaty of Versailles. The economy. Rearmament created economic boom and the huge government spending was on roads and houses, which helped improve their quality of life. Big businesses. There were big jobs for the government and there were no trade unions. And for industrial workers, the Strength Through Joy project provided leisure opportunities and the Beauty of Labour organisation improved working conditions.
The Hitler Youth and the League of German Maidens. The essentials. All youth organisations were replaced by the Hitler Youth and the League of German Maidens. The Hitler Youth was for 14 to 18-year-olds and was made compulsory in 1936. Its aim was to enforce Nazi ideas even at a young age.
Remember, Hitler Youth was not compulsory until 1936. Hitler Youth started to rise in 1933. Hitler Youth for men was separate from the League of German Maidens for girls and did very different things. Boys were trained to be soldiers and girls to be normal housewives. Hitler Youth was after school, not a part of school. The Nazis already had an educational program. Policies on women and family.
The essentials. The aim was to increase the population and enforce the ideas of staying home and being a mother. The policies encouraged marriage, Kinderkirche and Küche, rewarded for lots of children, e.g. the Mother Cross, and they had laws to enforce policies, e.g. banning abortions in 1933.
Remember, these policies only applied to Aryans. No women, especially when married, were in the top jobs.
The economy. Essentials. Economic boom from 1933 to 45. The economy developed prosperity, supported with the high government subsidies to those sectors that tended to give German military power and economic self-sufficiency, that is, economic independence from the global economy. They had made good progress, but not entirely achieved it. During the war itself, the German economy was sustained by the exploitation of conquered territory and people.
Remember, when the war ended, Allies took whatever they wanted from Germany, and including its economy. This left Germany devastated.
Life before and during the war. Essentials. There was an increase on sanctions against Jews. Many benefited from Nazi rule, for example the middle classes and the unemployed. In 1942 the war came home, millions were dead, cities destroyed, and Germany split between the Allies.
Remember, during the first years of World War II, Germany itself was not affected Germany wasn't affected by the fighting abroad. In fact, there was a boom unless you were Jewish, communist, etc. It was only in 1942 due to the bombing of Cologne that Germany was seriously affected by war. The upcoming war was very positive for Germany, apart from Jews. As Germany in 1933 to 42 was doing very well, it was an absolute shock for the people when they lost, and Germany was destroyed and shattered. Yeah.
Thank you for watching. We are going to give you some revision tips on how to pass your exams.
Start a history revision group. We attempted to do this, but after Sophie decided to charge admittance and demand regular attendance, it sort of fell apart. So a heads up, People won't pay you to let them revise. However, it is helpful to revise together. You can help each other, debate ideas and share resources, so this is definitely worth a try.
Mind maps. These are really helpful for visual learners, and a good technique is to explain the mind maps to someone else.
Teach someone else. It is useful to explain the ideas to other people. It can also help you remember them. What we don't mean by this is to stage a revolution, tie Miss Nelson up and take over the lesson.
Timelines. Timelines are a really helpful method of revision. One useful technique is to put post-it notes with detailed info onto the timeline and then learn them. Once you know them, take the post-it notes off and ask someone to test you.
Past papers. Completing past papers is always useful and can help cure your fear of papers. If you struggle, you can always ask Miss Nelson to mark them for you to show you how you're doing.
Start early. Believe me, I speak from experience. I know how tempting it is to spend your entire revision period on the sofa in your pyjamas watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians with massive amounts of chocolate. But it just won't help. Start your revision early, do it gradually, and you will do better in the exam.
Actually do revision. I can tell you what happens if you don't revise. You fail. If you put it off day after day, procrastinate, and never do it, you fail. Just revise. There is no other way to pass. Don't do what I did and just expect to sail through with no work. Actually revise.
When in an exam, always refer back to the question, as this makes sure your answer is relevant and that you don't blabber on. Back yourself up with examples, but make sure that you only use the relevant ones. Flash any specific knowledge, but don't give examples from other years than the question asks for.
There are different types of questions in the exam. You have to look at what the message is, why the source was published, how useful this source is, what does this source prove, are you surprised by the source? If the question says to describe, you need to explain fully. What is the message? So this is a 7-mark question. To get full marks, you need to identify the main message of the source and support it with details from the cartoon and your contextual knowledge. Why was this source published? This is a 6 or 7-mark question. To gain full marks, use contextual knowledge to explain the purpose of the poster at the time it was published.
How useful is this source? These questions are normally 6, 7 or 8 marks. To get full marks, you should use your knowledge to explain usefulness and to explain information about the purpose and the perspective from which it was written. Be careful that you don't talk about reliability, because that is not what the question asks for. Some useful phrases could be, this source is useful for, and then expand on the point, or, for example, it shows, and then expand.
So for what does this source prove? This is a 6 or 7 marks. To gain full marks, you have to argue yes or no by commenting on details from the source, using contextual knowledge. Make sure you provide a clear judgment. For this, you could say this source partly proves if used in context, or does not prove, or this source shows, and the context to this is therefore.
Are you surprised by this source? This is a 6 or 7 mark question. To gain full marks, make sure you refer to the context of the source and check it against contextual knowledge. A suggested phrase is, on one hand, I am surprised by this source because I can see that, or, and I know that, On the other hand, I am not surprised because I can see that and I know that.
How to boss a source question. One question we got in our mocks was, why was this poster published in 1919? Use the source and your knowledge to explain. And this is a 7-mark question. We have an example question of someone who got full marks in this question.
This poster was produced in Germany in 1919 as many feared the spread of Bolshevism or Russian communism. They had seen the 1917 Russian Revolution, and after the Kaiser's abdication in November 1918, they feared Bolshevism would spread. They had seen the terrible and bloody battles that had been a massive part of Russian life for the past 2 years, and were afraid the same would happen in Germany. In January, Ebert's Democratic Party won the first ever democratic election in Germany, making the country more left-wing than it had ever been. Many called for the Kaiser's reinstatement, such as the right-wing Freikorps, and it was feared that democracy would lead to communism.
I'm going to give you the most important piece of advice that you could possibly have when doing your history GCSE, and that is to make sure that you actually do section C, because if you don't, you will get a fail, and that is what I got because I didn't do section C. So make sure you do that, and do section C and the Germany section, and not section A and B, because I did section A and B and not C, and it didn't go very well. So just make sure you don't do that.